So today we are discussing childhood trauma. Childhood trauma, which is sometimes something that is very much kept silent. And this is something today that we need to start discussing because it creates a lot of problems in adults when, as children, we suffer from childhood trauma. And I want to begin by discussing with you all a very interesting study that was conducted by a doctor by the name of Vincent Felitti, who you may have heard of. He started off with this really cutting edge obesity clinic. I think it was in the 1980s, if I'm not mistaken. And to him were prescribed people who really, it was like their last chance. They were very much obese. Their life was in danger. Their organs were deteriorating. And so they created a project which he led to really try to rescue these people in using some experimental ways. And one of the ways that they did it is by conducting these intense fasts. So in England, there were Irish political prisoners that were jailed, and these Irish political prisoners at first were given some dignity in the sense that they didn't have to wear prisoner clothes, they weren't subjected to hard labor. But after a while, the government became more conservative and said, no, forget it, they're criminals like everybody else. Just put them in the same ranks as everyone else. And those Irish political prisoners, they went on a fast, protesting, and eventually they died. Many of them died fasting, doing a hunger strike. But the autopsies were able to show how it was that they slowly died. And so Dr. Felitti observed that, and he saw that basically one of the things that led to their death was a lack of potassium and magnesium that they would get from the nutrition. And so then the doctor said, okay, so one of the things that killed them is that. So if you're going on an intense fast, you need to make sure that you have potassium and magnesium. Another thing that was sustaining those political prisoners was fat, any fat that they had. So the fat could prolong their life for a few more days. If they had a lot of fat, it could prolong your life for a few months. But without the potassium and magnesium, you would soon die. And then also, they noticed that another thing that killed them was a lack of vitamin C and some other deficiencies. And so Dr. Felitti said, okay, well, what if we used those prisoners who died in that way and use and bring in all the things that they were lacking in order to prolong life. So they got the people that were highly obese to do these major fasts and just provided them with these basic nutrition like potassium, magnesium, vitamin C, and use their excess fat to sustain the body, so the body can feed off of that in order to live. And the people were able to live for several months. And it was very successful because I'll show you now a picture. There were some stars in the study. Like for example, the woman that you see here, who was weighing 408 pounds, and then according to this visual here, 51 weeks later, she went down to 132 pounds by doing this fast. Okay, so this is a remarkable success story. However, what happened is, and let's call this woman Susan. What happened is that after 3 weeks, 3 weeks of Susan's remarkable weight loss, she put on 37 pounds 3 weeks later. And then soon, not long after that, Susan ended up putting back the 400 plus pounds back again. So this was just like, very concerning to Dr. Felibi. What happened to Susan? She had done so well. She had met her goal, gone from 408 pounds to 132 pounds. So he had a talk with her, and he realized that, he asked her, so what's going on with you? What happened? And she said, well, honestly, I had something not so good happen to me recently, 3 weeks ago, when she started to put on the weight. There was a colleague at work who started to take an interest in me. And he even proposed marriage to me. And I started to feel threatened. I didn't feel safe. And so I started to overeat. And so then the doctor realized that there's something more going on than just overeating. And so he decided to look deeper. And he said, let's talk about, when did you first become obese? And she first became obese as a child. What happened to you that year that you started putting on weight? And then Susan hadn't told the doctor this at all during their work together. And she said, well, that was the time that my grandfather started raping me. And so she had put on the weight to protect herself from men, because she and other people who are obese, other women who are obese, confirm that when you are overweight, men don't look at you. They don't bother you. And so they feel safer that way. And in fact, 55% of the people that he was helping in his clinic, of the people who are obese, had the same story of sexual abuse. 55%, which contributed to their obesity, because others of them told him, to be overweight is to feel safe. And also, even men put on weight for other reasons of feeling more secure. Like there was a man who was a prison guard who also went down several hundred pounds, but now felt in danger doing his job in the prison, so he put on the weight back up because he felt that way stronger. And also people who had low self-esteem for other traumatic reasons. They say, when I apply for a job and I get a job and they see that I'm a big overweight person, they don't expect too much of me. Their standards of me are lower. And that makes me feel safer. So this study was amazing for the reasons that we just discussed, but actually it led to something more remarkable, which had to do with childhood trauma. So he decided to take this study further, and he worked with Kaiser Permanente. And in Kaiser Permanente, they started the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, where they created 10 categories of terrible things that can happen to you as a kid, 10 categories of childhood trauma. And Kaiser Permanente ended up dispersing this survey to all of its patients. And basically, the findings were incredible, because what they saw was that for every traumatic account of abuse that you went through as a kid, you were more likely to become depressed as an adult. If you had 6 categories of trauma that include sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, several different categories of trauma, if you had 6 of those categories, you were 5 times more likely to become depressed as an adult. And if you had 7 of those categories happen to you, you were 3,100 and more times likely to commit suicide. So It wasn't correlation anymore. It was causation. The greater the degree of childhood trauma, the greater the degree of depression and anxiety and and also other health problems later in life. So um, Johann Hari, in his book Lost Connections, which I mentioned earlier, he makes an assertion, and basically he tries to connect. Why is it that childhood trauma would lead to so much devastation in adulthood? I mean, it seems obvious. We can make the connections, but he makes an interesting assertion. Um, and one of the things that causes the most depression and anxiety in adulthood is emotional abuse. Not even so much sexual abuse, but emotional abuse. When your parents treat you like they don't love you, your parents, they neglect you, they abuse you verbally and emotionally. So he says that when you're a child, you are basically powerless. And when something traumatic happens to you, when somebody sexually abuses you, when somebody emotionally abuses you, physically abuses you, you have two choices. You accept that you're powerless, number one, or you try to gain some control of the situation because nobody likes to feel powerless, not even children. I have a 10-month-old baby and my 11-month-old baby, and my 11-month-old baby, loves to be in control. He wants to feed himself. He wants to go walk where he wants to go. He wants to do what he wants to do. I mean, it's a natural instinct, I think, for human beings to exert their free will, let's say. So, um, so you have two choices if you experience this trauma as a child. You're either powerless, you accept that as a little child, or you try to take some control. And so then you rationalize and you say, this was my fault. I caused this problem. I caused this sexual abuse that happened to me. I caused this emotional. I went along with it. I initiated it. I shouldn't have done that. I went here. I did this. And when you take up fault for something like that, you feel that you deserved it. And so how does that play out later on in life? You will naturally feel like you don't deserve any better in life. You don't deserve to heal. You don't deserve the job you want, the career you want, the life you want, the partner you want, the family you want. And so you develop this self-sabotaging pattern. And so now let's go ahead and kind of jump to another topic, and feel free, please, to post any comments now, okay, about anything that we're talking about so we can discuss them later. But now let's go ahead and take a look at what's been on the news this year. Not this year, this week. So we saw, it was even in the presidential debates, this came up. Out of the thousands, we're talking about 90,000 children who were separated at the border. I think it may be more than that, who were separated at the border starting in 2017 when the Trump administration took power. In fact, just in 2019, the U.S. held 69,550 children, separated them from their parents in 2019 alone. And they separated them from their parents while their parents were coming to the border seeking asylum. And they did this as a deterrent to not have people come and seek asylum in the United States, and also to try not to cross the border. So imagine what these children and the people detained, and especially the children, imagine how those children are going to rationalize this as adults. Think of them saying something like, oh, I must have done something wrong to do this. Maybe I didn't love my parents enough. Maybe I didn't deserve to have my mommy and daddy with me. Maybe I deserve for them to be taken from me. And think of how much psychological trauma that's going to lead to. It's appalling to look at to see what happened in 2000. And so far, in U.S. custody, over 7 children, that's the last number I remember, died in the custody of the government. And remember when there was the whole scandal where the U.S. government didn't feel like the children were worthy enough to get toothbrushes and soap. So we can't imagine how much suffering has been going on with these children while they were kept in the custody of the U.S. government. And actually, the longer that they stayed in the detention centers, the more their mental conditions deteriorated. The children were eventually dispersed. They were given off to sponsors, taken to local shelters. Um, they and they were all different ages. 85% of them were between the ages of 13 to 17. And the youngest ones were 4 months old. I mean, what human being strips a 4-month-old baby from their parent, from their mother? I think only animals do that. I mean, I think only human beings that have human skin but inside are animals do things like that. So what the government did is completely, it's a huge crime. And they tried to give them some counseling sessions, like once a week they're supposed to meet with a counselor, and they're also supposed to have group counselors, but they were very understaffed. Obviously, the pandemic didn't help a lot. At times, there was actually 25 children to one clinician in their efforts to try and improve the conditions for these children. And the children started self-harming. They started attempting suicide and exhibiting suicidal behavior. And they were not transferred quickly enough to get the right treatment once they were, up until that point. So, there's terrible stories. I mean, we talked about children blaming themselves, but then there's also the children that were so traumatized that they couldn't forgive their parents, even after being reunited or talking on the phone, especially stories of children screaming at their parents, "I don't love you anymore. How could you do this to me? You abandoned me." So it's sad, very sad. Now, let's talk a little bit about some strategies to overcome this problem. First of all, the doctor, Vincent Felitti, who did this amazing work, he said it's not enough just to identify these sad facts of childhood trauma. He said, what can we do to help them? So after Kaiser Permanente put out the survey to their patients, all the patients got them. Now it was like a routine. They all got them. And if the patients had marked that they had experienced some childhood trauma, they asked their doctors to please, on the next visit, ask them about it. Say, hello, we noticed that you experienced some sexual abuse as a child. You experienced some emotional abuse, physical abuse. Would you like to share with me? Would you like to talk a little bit more about that with me today? And it took the patients by surprise because they weren't there for anything like that. And many of them opened up. And for many of them, it was their first time talking about it. And it could have also been their first time talking about it to some kind of authority figure. And the job of the physicians was to listen. And the job of the physicians was to tell them, thank you for sharing that aspect of your life with me today. You didn't deserve that. That wasn't your fault. And they did their best. The objective was to make them feel like they had somebody who understood them and validated them and made it clear that what happened to them was an injustice and should have never happened, and it was not their fault. And what they discovered is that due to this intervention, there was a massive reduction of humiliation that they felt, and that validation was a big step forward for those people. And there was reports that 35% of them, they studied them over time, they were coming to the doctor less. And they made sure that it wasn't because some negative emotions were stirred up, they didn't want to come back to see that physician. No, it was because they were actually getting healthier. So the intervention caused that 35% of them no longer had, they were healed from their illnesses. And they had to come back less for these medical conditions. So what this shows us is that the best way that we can help people with childhood trauma, the best way that you can help yourself, if you have some childhood trauma, I have childhood trauma. And the best way that we can help is if we help ourselves, is that we realize that it was not our fault, that we are not to blame. And when we're helping others, we have to also make that clear to them, because it is the humiliation that causes so much problems. During the AIDS epidemic, gay men who were in the closet were 2 to 3 times more likely to die of HIV than gay men who were openly gay. And it's because of the humiliation, the shame of being gay that exasperated the disease. And it is the shame and the humiliation that we go through as children that ends up sabotaging our life and making us feel depressed and anxious. And we have to learn to let go of that. And we have to learn to help others let go of that. Listen to them. If they talk about it, take it seriously and acknowledge it and help them. You know, the Catholic Church has the practice of confessions. It's a practice that they've had for thousands of years. Yes, it was corrupt. You know, priests take advantage of these situations and bribes and stuff to relieve people of their sins. But there was something else, the purity of the original idea, which is that we human beings need to be able to unload our problems to somebody else who cares. And so if that existed and continues to exist for thousands and thousands of years, there's some merit there that has to do with listening and getting rid of our humiliations, opening up to others. So let's go ahead then, please, and now open up our discussion. Anybody here have any comments? Let's see the comments now. So we can start here on YouTube. Christina says namaskar and congratulations, Hitendra. And Hitendra says, thank you, Anushila. Feelings of I'm not enough lead to feelings of worthlessness later in life that is often reinforced by religious views of you are cursed and can do nothing about it. The thrust of the hypnotherapy course is I am enough. As far as the destructive work of our government, we must all accept responsibility for the treatment of these children and work to hold our collective responsibility and re-educate our collective destruction of by the people, of the people, and for the people. Well, I agree with you 100%, Hitendra, that we need to feel collectively responsible. And that has to do with once we do our best to reunite these children, and hopefully we can walk away with wanting to do something a little more than just talking about it, to try and reunite these children. And eventually we're going to have to learn that this kind of thing should never ever happen again. That this zero tolerance of immigrant people coming into the country is like barbaric as the crimes of the 20th century, where putting people in cages, rounding them up, who all happen to be the same race, same socioeconomic class, all the racism that goes behind this, thinking that these children don't deserve toothbrushes, they don't deserve soap, they don't even deserve real blankets. If you remember the pictures of whatever those aluminum sheets are that they're using. And it's like a social experiment that the US government did on sacrificing these children. It's a big crime, I agree with you. And Christina says, 100% agree that we are collectively responsible. It's the number one thing that I remind myself and others when hearing about such atrocities. Thank you, Christina. And Kayla says, we have, Kayla says, so much love around the world. Joanne from PA. Welcome, Joanne. If this is your first time, let us know. Great to have you. Anisita, thank you from the Philippines. Thank you. So glad you're joining us all the way from the Philippines. Kayla says, me too, from PA. Great. We have some people can be friends if they're in the same local area. That's great. Crescendo Clifford says, what person strips a 4-month-old baby child from its mother? Probably a topic for another session. The claim is that there are legal requirements to adopt cruel policies as a means justified by the safety to be obtained, the ends. Interesting how safety-seeking actions lead to harms of weight gain in some and in cruelty in others. Well, yeah, yes, I also agree with that. That we take our pain and weaponize it. We take our traumas and impose it on other people in different ways. That's definitely true. Hence why it is so important that we go through our healing process. Very, very important.